The office had been quiet all afternoon, the kind of heavy silence that settles in after too many interviews and too many rehearsed answers. Daniel checked the list on his desk and exhaled slowly. She was the last candidate for the job. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the old building, casting long shadows across the polished wooden table, where dozens of hopeful applicants had sat that day. He had listened to polished resumes, confident promises, and carefully memorized mission statements. None of it had moved him. When the receptionist knocked gently and announced the final name, he straightened his tie, expecting nothing more than another routine conversation. But the moment she stepped inside, something shifted. She looked nervous, almost pale, clutching her folder tightly against her chest, as if it held more than just her qualifications. Her eyes met his for a brief second, and there was something, their recognition, shock, maybe even fear. She sat down carefully, smoothing her sweater, avoiding his gaze. Daniel opened her file, scanning her credentials, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Education, strong references, impressive experience. Yet, when he flipped to the last page, a small handwritten note slipped out and landed softly on the desk between them. Furrowed as he picked it up, in neat, unmistakable handwriting, it read, "Already married to you." For a second, he thought it had to be a mistake, some strange joke meant for someone else. His heart began to pound as he looked up at her, searching her face for explanation. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling slightly on the edge of the table. The air between them grew thick, charged with confusion and unspoken questions. "Is this some kind of prank?" he asked quietly, though his voice lacked its usual authority. She shook her head almost immediately, tears glistening in her eyes. There was no humor in her expression, only vulnerability. The note was not written playfully. It carried weight, history. Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest, as if a memory he couldn't quite reach was clawing its way back to the surface. He studied her features more closely, the curve of her smile, the familiar tone in her voice when she finally spoke his name. The room, once just another interview setting, suddenly felt like the stage of a life-altering revelation. She was the last candidate for the job. Yes, but becoming terrifyingly clear that this interview was about far more than employment. The silence stretched so long, it felt fragile, like glass about to crack. Daniel stared at her, trying to force his mind to connect pieces that refused to fit together. "We were married," she repeated softly, her voice steadier now, despite the tears threatening to fall. He leaned back in his chair, as if distance might help him think more clearly. 5 years ago, there had been an accident, head trauma, weeks in the hospital, months of rehabilitation. He had been told there were gaps in his memory, but no one had ever mentioned a marriage. No one had said he had lost something that significant. His hands tightened around the edge of the desk. "That's not possible," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Yet, even as he said it, doubt crept in. Emma slowly opened her folder again, her movements careful, almost hesitant. She slid a photograph across the table. It was slightly worn at the corners, as if it had been carried often. Daniel picked it up, and his breath caught. The man in the picture was unmistakably him, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years. Standing beside him was Emma, radiant in a simple white dress, her hand intertwined with his. They looked happy, not posed, not staged, genuinely happy. His chest tightened painfully. "You disappeared," she whispered, "after the accident. Your parents told me you needed space. They said you didn't remember me, and that it would be better if I stayed away. I tried to fight, but they threatened legal action. I was young. I didn't know what to do." Daniel felt anger rising, but it wasn't directed at her. It was confusion, betrayal, and disbelief, all tangled together. He remembered waking up in a hospital bed. He remembered his parents by his side, explaining what he had forgotten: business deals, investments, certain friendships, but never this, never a wife. He looked at Emma again, really looked at her, and something shifted deep inside him. A flicker of warmth, a faint echo of familiarity in the way she said his name earlier. "Why come back now?" he asked quietly. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. "Because I heard you were hiring. Because I thought if I could just sit across from you again, maybe something would come back." Her voice broke slightly. "Didn't want to force you. I just wanted the truth to have a chance. The office no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like the center of a forgotten past, waiting to be uncovered. She walked into the office with a quiet confidence, though the nervous flutter in her stomach refused to let her feel entirely at ease. Being the last candidate for the job carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. All the other applicants had already impressed the interviewers with polished resumes, confident answers, and the expected smiles. But somehow, her unconventional approach had left the room in stunned silence. She had written in the notes section of her application, "Already married to you." At the time, it had felt like a bold, playful way to stand out, a way to signal commitment and devotion to the role. But now, as she sat across from the hiring manager, she wasn't sure if it had been clever or catastrophic. The receptionist's faint smirk as she passed only deepened her anxiety. The manager, a stern-looking woman with sharp glasses and an air of careful judgment, tapped her pen against the desk, watching her closely. "So," she began, voice deliberate and measured, "you're the last candidate today. Tell me about the note you included in your application." A deep breath steadied her nerves. She met the manager's gaze and gave a small, knowing smile. "I wanted to convey my dedication," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "I meant it as a metaphor, that once I commit to something, I give it my all, completely. It's how I approach work, life, any responsibility." The manager leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence stretched long enough to make her second-guess every word, every gesture she had made over the past hour. But then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of the manager's lips, a smile that suggested amusement, perhaps even admiration. "That's unusual," she said softly, more to herself than to the candidate. "But sometimes unconventional is exactly what we need." Relief washed over her in a warm, dizzying wave. She realized then that the note, which had felt so risky, had not been a mistake at all. It had been her way of showing that she wasn't just another candidate who could do the job. She was someone who would throw herself into it completely, without reservation. In that moment, she understood why she had been the last person to interview. The company wasn't looking for ordinary it, was looking for someone willing to take bold steps, someone unafraid to be memorable. And as the manager scribbled a few notes and looked up with a nod, she knew without needing to hear the words that the gamble had paid off.